Hi and welcome back to our channel, where we recap your favorite games for you. Today we will be recapping the sequel to Outlast. Outlast 2 is a horror mystery game in which we follow Blake Langerman and his fight to protect his partner Lynn from Noth, a twisted cult leader. A mix of Blake's past and present showcases his struggle after he wakes up from his helicopter crash, and his frantic attempt to not only survive, but save Lynn from a whole cult out for their blood. The first scene opens while our main character, Blake Langerman, is having a nightmare about himself in the 4th grade. He wakes up saying the name Jessica in a helicopter. His partner, Lynn, asks who he was dreaming about, saying another woman's name in the dream, and they appear to be in a relationship. He reminds her of Jessica, and she doesn't seem that comfortable talking about her. The helicopter seems to run into some problems, but the pilot tells them it's okay. They begin to record for their website News Tomorrow Net about the story of a Jane Doe, found strangled to death while waking barefoot, pregnant, 100 miles away from any settlement. As they're recording, the plane engine fails, causing it to crash. As it's falling, Blake tries to grab onto Lynn, and once again we're transported to the school from the time they were in the 4th grade. A locker opens mysteriously, showing Blake as a young child. As he walks through the corridors, the doors shut suddenly in front of him by themselves, and as he looks behind him, he sees a young girl, most probably Jessica. A flood of blood rises from behind her, engulfing them both and jolting Blake awake. He wakes up hurt and sees the plane has crashed. Going through the footage they were recording earlier, he tries to figure out what has happened to Lynn. As he keeps walking, he sees there are no bodies inside the helicopter, so Lynn must be alive. However, the pilot is seen tied up to a tree and completely disfigured. Blake tells himself that the plane crash must have done it. He keeps looking for Lynn and surprisingly finds a town, as he previously thought this place was deserted. As he walks into a house, he sees a man recently dead, with an eerie letter from his wife, stating that although she realizes her children had to have been sacrificed, she cannot survive without them, and seems to have taken her own life. As Blake walks further into the house, he sees a room with children's bodies lying on the floor in a cross shape. Once outside, he hears eerie whispering as he walks through the forest. He sees almost hypnotized people, each reliving a painful memory. He hears a man's voice, speaking about God and religion, seemingly of a cult leader. He speaks of an outsider bringing the devil into their midst. Blake sees people in cages and makes his way around. He sees Lynn jump from a window and follows her. She seems spooked and refuses to recount what has happened and tells him to run from the heretics. They continue to call after them, speaking of Lynn as a vessel, and the child inside her belly as the devil. Blake is the father of the child. The leader Noth tells his followers to remove the baby from Lynn's body and kill it by crushing it under their feet. Eventually they are caught by them, and the leader Noth tells Blake he will meet him again. Once again transported to his past in a classroom, he reads a message on the board from Jessica, which is apparently a suicide note, as well as a cry for help. He also finds a picture of all three of them as children on the table. He seems to fall and wakes up with his head smashed in. A man appears to help, and as he follows him to his house, tells him his wife was removed from the cult, and the leader forced himself on his daughter, Lee, and who was only 15. Her father spun some stories so she could run away. Blake realizes he is talking about the Jane Doe and tells her father she is all right. He tells Blake to rest in the cellar and that he will keep him safe. As Blake goes to sleep, he once again dreams of Jessica's voice screaming out for help. He is awoken to the sound of a woman threatening the man who saved him to tell her where the outsider Blake is, as he is the father of the child. Blake watches the man be killed, and thanks him for protecting him at the cost of his own life. He walks back into the forest, seeing people strung up on poles with horns on their heads. He sees the woman who is looking for him dragging a body across the ground, whispering that all those that go against God will be ripped up, as well as their women and children. He comes across a heretic temple and enters the chapel. The power is cut off, so he turns the generator back on so he can use the lift. He sees a crazy woman with a knife who seems oblivious to his presence. Hearing Jessica's voice, he follows it to a locked room. Suddenly, he is dragged into a well and wakes up in some vents. He crawls out into the classroom from before. Walking around, he finds Jessica hanging from the ceiling. As he approaches her, a dark shadow snatches her up into it. Blake walks into a room where a man attacks him and is back in the town. He calms himself down and hides from people trying to kill him. Bandaging his arm, he decides to head back to the chapel. There is a man tied to a large wheel with the words Judas carved on his chest. He calls Blake the father and asks him to kill him, so that Noth won't hurt his wife to make him talk. Blake hides and overhears that the heretics don't have Lynn and someone named Val has taken her. They only have a few hours to find her before she gives birth. Knopf tortures his wife by stretching her arms and legs, thus forcing the man to tell them that Val has Lynn in the mines in the mountains. Both the man and his wife are killed. Blake walks through the chapel and uses a hook to tie the chains on the door and make his way outside. He finds the mine and heads inside. He's suddenly back in the classroom, to the time before he found Jessica hanging. A picture of a hangman is drawn on the whiteboard. He realizes that it's part of the game Lynn and Jessica used to play and tries to find the other half of the hangman. He heads into the vents again where something drags him back into the mine. He heads across a precarious path and is attacked by flies, causing him to fall. As he comes to, he continues his way, fighting off heretics who continue to attack him. Back in the classroom, he follows Jessica, who is running away from him, and asks her to come back. He finds the rest of the hangman puzzle. He is caught by heretics back in the forest where one of them slices open his hand and forces Blake to drink his blood so they can make sure it's him. They come to the realization he hasn't been reborn yet and they need to tie him to the cross. They drag Blake up the hill and nail one of his hands to the cross. They discover his camera and call it the gospel and hammer his other hand onto the cross as well. Blake passes out. Once he comes to, he forcefully frees himself and walks back into the forest. Hiding from the heretics, he holds his breath underwater and walks into a house to find his camera. As soon as he turns it on, he is back in the classroom. Purple mass oozes out from the walls in a sort of glitch, appearing and disappearing. Hearing a phone ring, he finds it and picks up. A voice tells him to wait at a safe place while they come to get him, but ends in a severe taunt, to which he hangs up. Something appears to grab him through the phone, and Blake finds and hides in a locker. He ends up back in the town, and as he's running, he gets stuck in some barbed wire and is caught by the heretic Nick, who locks him in a casket, telling him that the gospel is not yet complete. Nick tells the other heretics to carry him to the Tomb of Sorrows where his tomb is waiting. Nick is put down and buried alive in his casket. Somehow making his way out, he runs through the forest. He sees the mine below him and enters a small cottage to find rope to get down. He chances upon a letter which tells him someone has used the rope from the pulley, and if he requires it, he will have to cut him down. As he's running away from the heretics, he gets hurt and heals himself. He ties the rope and almost escapes, but they cut the rope. He wakes under the ground and crawls his way onto the roof, which is covered in snow. He enters a lair through an opening in the ground. He comes out of the other side to find a lake, which he feels put off by and doesn't want to go through the water. He finds a raft to help him get across. Dead fish appear on the way, which Blake recognizes as signs of the apocalypse. A sudden wave upturns his boat, pushing him beneath the water where he sees a rotted corpse. Gasping for breath, he makes his way to the raft and gets on, desperately looking for Lynn. Concluding that the Christians don't want her to have the baby, and the heretics do want the birth to take place to spite God, he becomes more frantic for Lynn because she'll become useless to them when they realize she is not pregnant. He comes across harrowing images of people killed and forced on spikes on his way. He loses the raft, which gets stuck on the other side of the ravine, forcing him to continue on foot. In order to get across to the raft so that he can continue his journey, he pushes down an old tree to make a bridge and reaches a huge stone with the words "Love set us free" written in blood. Back on the raft, he thinks back to Lynn and the fact that she can't be pregnant as they haven't been together in months. Dragged underwater once again, he is back in the school swimming pool. In the lockers, the shower head is spurting blood into a cubicle, and there is blood coming out of the toilets. The door seems to warp in front of him. He hears Jessica's voice calling him for help, as the sprinklers also rain blood on him. Back in the forest, a man covered in blood tells him they tried to get Lynn back from the Christians, but they killed them. He tells Blake they have to go in to get out of here. Once again in the school, he appears in front of a computer and a chat box with Jessica is shown on the screen. Blake prompts her to reply, which she does. She says she can see him typing and to turn around, and as he does, he sees her hanging over a computer for a split second before she disappears. He asks her what was open on her laptop, to which she replies she is just messing around, and she doesn't understand how the computer works, as well as the fact that Lynn is waving at him. As he is about to reply, the screen switches to a conversation between Jessica and a woman sharing the story of her being abused by her husband. The computers all start flashing and Blake runs out. A tentacle seems to grab him, causing him to jolt back to reality. He sees a heretic and hides in a container. Hurt, he heals himself, then makes his way by scaling the side of the building. As he jumps inside, he is back at the school and sees multiple bodies of little girls identical to Jessica hanging from a high ceiling. He turns to see the ceilings around him covered in blood, as a cross falls to the floor from a wall covered in bloody handprints. Running to the library, he sees ghost-like figures around every corner. Back to reality, he falls on Jessica's corpse as both worlds seem to merge. He hides in the bathroom cubicles and then makes his way through the school hallways with purple masks on the wall. The woman who was looking for him and Noth both ask him to show his true face as he frantically asks about Lynn. Somehow back in the mines, he grabs a cart on the rails and drags it along with him. Following it, he finds openings and goes down some stairs. The woman from before blows something into Blake's face and steals his camera. Noth's voice asks Blake to help make him things right and tells him the baby is here. Through blurry vision, he sees Lynn and suddenly switches to Jessica play fighting with the younger him. He follows her, as she asks him if Lynn asked him to ask her something. She wants to come over, but on the way, they encounter Father Laudermilch, who asks them if they were misbehaving. Lynn asks Blake not to leave her. He asks Jessica if he needs to call her father again, which scares her. The father asks Blake to leave, and when he doesn't, insinuates that something is going on between them, which they refuse. He tells him to leave them, although Jessica doesn't want him to. However, due to the priest's insistence, he does and makes his way out. Just as he is about to leave, he hears Jessica scream and makes his way back, seeing her bloody on the floor and the father telling him he saw wrong and it's not what it appears. Back in the present, he sees Jessica's body in his arms and makes his way through the mine to a pregnant Lynn. He promises her that he won't let them kill her. They run away together and try to get as far away as possible. They try to take shelter in a little cave as the baby is coming, but Lynn falls and injures herself. Blake lays Lynn down, but they're being chased, so they continue to run, with Lynn insisting she needs to lie down. The woman from before appears in front of them, just about to kill them, but she's suddenly struck by a cross and killed. Lynn yells at her, "Fuck you and your god." They continue to run and try to find shelter. Everything around them seems to be burnt due to the storm, causing fires to break out around them. Lynn informs Blake the baby girl is coming soon, and so when they see the chapel, they decide to protect themselves there, so they'll be safe from the storm. Lynn tells him it hurts too much and that something is wrong and dies as soon as she gives birth. Distraught, Blake cries for her with the baby in his arms. Back with Jessica, Blake is asked by her if him and Lynn are together, which ties back to the scene where they were fighting. He wakes up with a man saying that he's killed children before, but Blake's is already too strong, and that he has murdered Paradise. The priest tells him that he has killed all his children as a sign of a perfect faith, but God is silent. He tries to persuade Blake to kill his child if he loves anything at all and crush its skull under his heel, as Noth had said. Saying he knows that God doesn't hear dead men, but expects he answers them, he slits his throat in front of him and dies. Blake leaves with the baby and goes outside to see a huge ball of fire coming toward him, and just as it's about to teach him, he hears hymns and Jessica's voice. Jessica takes his hand and tells him they won't get each other go and prays in front of him, and the game ends here. Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, then please consider liking our video and subscribing to our channel. We will see you in the next one.